Welcome to the Westminster Town Hall Forum online. My name is Tim Hart Anderson. I'm the Senior Minister of Westminster Presbyterian Church and moderator of today's forum. Today I'm pleased to be talking with Eddie Glaude Jr. For 40 years, the Town Hall Forum has offered its programs as a service to the community, and our events are always free and open to all. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we're not holding forums in front of a live audience, although our speakers will be pre-recorded. We believe that exploring the key issues of the day together from an ethical perspective is now more important than ever. We're simply moving the conversation online until we can gather again in the beauty of Westminster's sanctuary. The forum relies on donations from co-sponsors and individuals for its operating funds. In fact, nearly 85% of our funding comes from individuals like you. Although Westminster Church does provide generous in-kind support, the forum is a community resource funded entirely by the community. This long tradition has been made possible by gifts from our co-sponsors and friends like you. If you would like to join me and many others in becoming a forum supporter, you may donate securely by credit card at westminsterforum.org or mail your donation to us at the address shown on your screen. The Town Hall Forum is proud to partner today with Minnesota Public Radio News, as we have for many years. This forum will be broadcast today on NPR News Presents 91.1 in the Twin Cities, and again this evening at 9 p.m. We're also grateful to MinnPost, who once again serves as the forum's media sponsor. Thank you for watching today and for joining the Town Hall Forum on this online adventure. And now, let's begin. Eddie Glaude Jr. is the James S. McDonnell Distinguished University Professor at Princeton University and Chair of the Department of African American Studies. He's the former president of the American Academy of Religion, the largest professional organization of scholars of religion in the world. His latest book is Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and Its Urgent Lessons for Our Own. And he's also the author of the award-winning books In a Shade of Blue, Pragmatism and the Politics of Black America, and Democracy in Black, How Race Still Governs the Soul of America, which he discussed in his Town Hall Forum appearance in 2016, just before another presidential election. Dr. Glaude is a columnist for Time magazine and a regular contributor on MSNBC. He holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Morehouse College, a master's degree in African American studies from Temple University, and a Ph.D. in religion from Princeton University. His scholarly pursuits and public service were shaped by his years growing up in the coastal town of Moss Point, Mississippi. We're glad to welcome to the Westminster Town Hall Forum today, Professor Eddie Glaude Jr. Eddie Glaude, it's good to have you with us at the Westminster Town Hall Forum again. Welcome.
It's a pleasure.
You're joining me in this conversation Friday, 3 days after the election. We don't know who won. It looks like it's trending in a direction toward Biden as the next president. So I don't want to spend a lot of time speculating on that, but I do want to talk about the sort of the deeper meaning of what's going on in the country. Frankly, whoever wins this election, you referred to the 2016 presidential election as a referendum on the direction of the country and who we take ourselves to be. Would you describe the 2020 election similarly as a referendum on the country and who we take ourselves to be? And if so, what do you think the results of that referendum are, not just the president, but the rest of us?
Well, in some ways, the referendum has already been issued. We've answered. I think we're in the midst of a moral reckoning with regards to how we answered the question in 2016. And so this election is a feature of that reckoning, not so much a referendum, but a reckoning. And what is being revealed, whether Biden wins or not, is how deeply divided we are the data is clear that more white Americans voted for Donald Trump in 2020 than they did in 2016. And that's after the evidence of 4 years of governance. So it is clear to me that we are still grappling with our ghosts and their present manifestations. So we're still in the midst of the reckoning.
And you've described that as a moral reckoning in which we have to decide once and for all, are we going to be a multiracial democracy or not?
Yeah, and that's key, right? And that involves displacing the idea that racial justice is a philanthropic or charitable enterprise, but actually seeing the idea of racial justice as an integral part of what we imagine to be a just America. We have to figure out a different way of being together, Tim. And that's going to require some hard work that goes well beyond politics or election cycles. Mm-hmm. That's hard, ethical, moral work, day-to-day work, it seems to me.
And where does that work take place?
It takes place on a number of different levels, it seems to me. It takes place obviously at the level of policy. So politics matter. It takes place in the way in which we budget our values. Right. Another way of talking about defunding the police, the way in which we budget our values, right? It reflects who we care about, what we care about. It evidences itself in the way we live together, in our efforts to break down the monuments to an ideology that go beyond Confederate statues, but go to city zoning and ordinances, go to neighborhood configurations, right? The way in which we live together in the intimacy of our doings and sufferings, as it were, because we're walking mysteries to each other, and it takes some explosion of horror for us to kind of go, "Oh my God, is this really happening?" So we have to figure out a way at the local level, in our living, at the level of politics, at the local, state, and national levels, in terms of how we budget our values, how we pass policies to redress historic wrongs that are a result of policy. And it involves, in some ways, lastly, our imaginations. Mm-hmm. We're going to have to break free from this idea that, our lives are defined by a zero-sum game, right? That in order for us to live in a just world, that we have to sacrifice something of our own, right? That frame is just, to my mind, evil.
Mm-hmm. You've said that the idea of America is in deep trouble. You didn't say America is in deep trouble, which, in fact, it arguably is. But you said the idea of America is in deep trouble. What do you mean by that? How would you describe the idea of America and the trouble it's in?
So this idea of America is that, we are an example of democracy achieved, that we're the shining city on the hill, as Reagan adds that adjective to John Winthrop's description of the New World, that we're the shining city on the hill, that we're a redeemer nation, that this perfectionist impulse about America always already on the road to a more perfect union is confronting the ugliness of what we've done and who we are. Mm-hmm. That this epistemic ignorance at the heart of our self-conception, our refusal, our willful denial of what's happening around us. Baldwin says in Fire Next Time that the innocence is the crime, mm-hmm. right? That all of that is falling away. In a world of scarcity, in a world in which the very rich continue to extract, in a world where everyday hardworking people are busting their behinds and not being able to make ends meet, in a world where people can't seem to dream and make their dreams a reality. That kind of imagining of America doesn't quite work because it runs up against the reality of America as broken. Mm-hmm. Especially with millennials and Gen Zers and Gen Xers and Gen Ys, or whatever letter they are. Mm-hmm. Right. This is a generation, we can call them the catastrophic generation. They're growing up amid, the planet screaming, it's dying because of us.
Mm-hmm.
Great recession, mass shootings,
Mm-hmm.
right? We can go on, global pandemic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Depression level. I mean, this generation, they outside of many of them growing up with a Black family in the White House, their lives have been defined by layered catastrophic events.
Mm-hmm.
And so they know that the country is broken. They know that our politics are broken. So that idea of America is in deep trouble.
Yeah, you use the phrase the lie. You talk about the lie a lot in your writing and working with Baldwin as you did. What is the lie that which we've defined what the idea of America isn't, where we've failed, but what's the lie that we're living in a way in this land, in your view?
Well, it's in some ways bound up with the idea of America that we just talked about, right? This idea that we are the shining city on the hill, an example of democracy achieved. Baldwin in 1964 wrote an interesting essay, and I'm paraphrasing him here. He says that the Christians who set out to found this country began with the fatal flaw, right? They wanted to found a democracy, as it were, but they also had chattel. Mm-hmm. And they had to tell themselves that these people were not human beings. Because if they were not human beings, then no crime would have been committed. And so Baldwin says that lie is at the heart of our present problem, our present trouble. So it's not only the lie that we tell ourselves about our virtue, it's the lies we tell to hide our vice, right? The lies that we've told ourselves to hide and obscure the bitterness at the bottom of the cup of our way of life, to invoke William James. And that lie is always threatening to haunt. It always haunts because we don't want it to be revealed. We don't want to see ourselves for who we are, right? And so part of what I try to do in my own work, with different kinds of phrases and language I'm trying to reach for, whether it's the value gap, as we talked about last time I was here, right? This belief that white people matter more than others and how this belief shapes our dispositions and informs our social, political, and economic practices. And now I'm adding in this book, the lie constitutes the lies we tell to obscure the value gap and its workings and its doings. So we have to lay bare, as Baldwin would say, we have to tell the truth. We have to bear witness. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm trying to do when I name it as the lie.
Mm-hmm. Can you? I understand Baldwin's own call to be a witness, and his whole life and all of his writing really is a witness to the lie, but it's also a witness to something beyond the lie, which is how we might begin again. With, of course, that's the title of your book. And you as an African American scholar, as an African American man, and coming out of Mississippi in the South, went to Morehouse, you've borne the brunt of the lie your whole life, and you can be a witness. How about those of us who are white, who have complicity in the lie? How do we become witnesses to the lie and the truth?
Tell it. There's this wonderful line in Baldwin's work. He was being interviewed by Vern Margie Ekman for the first biography in 1966 written, The Furious Passage. Not a very good book, but it's full of first-person interviews with Baldwin. And Baldwin he offers a definition of witness. We have to make the suffering real, to tell the story. Mm-hmm. That's not contingent upon whether one's experienced it or not. It's not contingent upon the color of one's skin. Right? These are categories that in some ways are our own creations to keep us from actually confronting the truth of who we are. These categories are often our efforts to make ourselves safe in a world that's so full of the unpredictable. So we anchor the world in these categories that kind of ground our feet in some ways. So what is it that someone who has benefited from the lie, what can they do? Right? They have to do what I think Wendell Berry calls for in The Hidden Wound. They have to engage in the ongoing interrogation of how whiteness comes to them as naturally as language. And then act on your conception of a just world. Right? So, I get this question a lot, right? Well, what can I do to help? Well, what is your understanding of a just world? Let's get about that work. If you believe that someone should, if they're working 40 to 60 hours a week, they should have a living wage. Let's work on that together. If you believe that people should be treated equally under the law, no matter the color of their skin or their zip code, let's work on that. If you believe that no matter, your sexual orientation, you should be able to spend your life with the person you love without punishment, without, maltreatment. Let's work on that. So what is your conception of justice? It can't be charity.
No.
Right? Those are different things. So you see what I mean? We all can bear witness to the truth of what an unjust world is.
This is quite helpful as a preacher. I mean, in the Black tradition, the preacher is the witness.
Exactly.
And less in our tradition, a more white sort of mainline product, the preacher is the scholar, which keeps the reality of the world at arm's length. We were taught not to use the first person in our preaching, to hold your emotions in check, and all that is hindering getting at the reality of, in this case, our complicity in the racial reality of America.
Right. This is the power of the Romantics, though. Right. To put aside reason and kind of begin to think about the role of the passions in some ways.
Yeah. Move from the head to the heart.
Right.
Yeah. Go from Athens to Jerusalem.
Right. And Emerson's invocation of we all need to be poets. Right? And poets are those who make the world more expansive and our place in it. So, I understand that tradition of reason that informs a certain kind of sermonizing, but the Romantics are so much more interesting.
To what extent do you think that the lie is a theological or a spiritual problem? I was surprised in your book to the extent to which Baldwin, on the one hand, is pretty critical of Christian complicity in the lie, but on the other hand, uses the language of New Jerusalem as the new beginning, which is straight out of Revelation.
Exactly.
Yeah. What's the theological or spiritual dimension of this work to create the lie and maintain it?
Yeah, this is a really important question, right? Because Baldwin is very clear that the problem ain't us, to put it in colloquial language. That although we bear the brunt of white supremacy, we bear the brunt of racism, that we have to raise our children in the midst of it. Baldwin is also insisting that racism distorts the character of those who cleave to it. We're not the monsters. So, it's this moment in Jefferson's notes, right, where he offers that famous phrase where he's worried about what God's punishment exacted on the nation for the sin of slavery, right? But that formulation happens in the section in the notes around habit formation. And he's thinking about the child who witnesses, beatings of slaves by their fathers, right? And what that witness of violence, how it shapes his character. So what is the moral implication of the lie, right? It distorts our moral sense, right? Such that we can't even become the kinds of people that democracies require because we're so invested in this illusion, right? In these myths and these legends that keep us from seeing who we are. So what does it mean not to confront the sinfulness of human beings? Right? It opens up hubris. It leads you to think that you can be God, right? But this sinfulness of flesh, to acknowledge it, right, opens one to, theologically, I suppose, to recognize the sinfulness of flesh is to open one up to the power of grace. So what does it mean to tell oneself a lie about who one actually is? It completely shuts you off from not only grace, but love.
And
it seems to me.
Yeah, it damages your inner being, your soul, and salvation is found in that love, which I read somewhere in a book. We went to the National Museum of African American History and Culture last January and spent 2 days. Wish we had a third day. I assume have been there. You know, you're lowered down into the hold of the ship, so to speak, in that elevator with a bunch of strangers, and you emerge, and there's the quote from John Hope Franklin on the wall as you enter into the exhibition telling of the enslavement of Africans. We've got to tell the unvarnished truth, which is another way of saying we've got to stop living the lie. What is prohibiting us as a nation from telling the unvarnished truth? I mean, it's not like it's hidden from us.
Well, to admit what has happened and what is happening is to concede. Is to concede something about oneself. Right. So Baldwin will say over and over again that the most exhausting thing about being Black in the United States is to have to convince white folk that what's happening to us is real. Right. Because if they believe what we say is happening to us, then it says something about them. So it's this evasion. We're not that. Right. We have bad apples. We're not that. You know, it's this kind of melodramatic understanding of human being, right? That you have the obviously evil people and the obviously good people, right? It's like it's All My Children or something, or a John Wayne cartoon, or a DC comic movie, right? Where you have the obvious villains and the obvious heroes, right? So part of the challenge that we face is that people don't want to confront their own complicity. I didn't hold slaves. Why am I being held accountable? I wasn't in Mississippi. I didn't benefit from Jim Crow and Jane Crow. And you go,
I'm the least racist person there is. Yeah.
Yeah, in this room. You know, we heard it all the time, right? And so I think that's at the heart of it.
So we've had moments in our nation's history when we've approached the truth and tried to do something about it. I'm thinking of the Civil War was in effect a national violent exercise in letting the truth be told. And then Reconstruction was, okay, we've learned something about ourselves and the truth of what we've done. And now we're going to implement some serious change. I remember standing in Savannah, Georgia, in the house where Sherman was meeting with Black pastors, many of whom were recently freed from slavery. And he said, "What do you need?" And they said, "We need 40 acres." And he said, "Okay." Checked with the president, and Lincoln said yes. So they developed a plan of 250 miles of coastline, the Carolinas, Georgia, down into Florida, 40 acres, and it was 30 miles inland. So it was a well thought out plan. And then of course Lincoln was assassinated, and we lost that. But that was a first, maybe not the first, but it was an attempt at reparations, and Reconstruction really was substantive in some of the changes it instituted. And then you get the Civil Rights Movement, and Civil Rights Act, voting rights, fair housing, and then the aftertime, as how you all call it. Where are we in terms of our present reality? Are we in the aftertime of another, with Obama's presidency, for instance, of another attempt to know the truth and maybe be set free by it?
Well, we're definitely in the aftertimes, right? That interregnum, that period between a world collapsing and a world desperately trying to come into being. There is this sense. That at every moment in which we have an opportunity to be otherwise, we double down on our ugliness. Right? We choose the safety of whiteness, that this is a white nation. Mm-hmm. And whiteness here is maybe too easy, because it's also deep selfishness that fundamentally challenge the health of the republic in this moment. So there's something different in this moment than the previous moments. So, right after Reconstruction, about a decade or so after Reconstruction, you get Jim Crow. Douglass lives long enough to see Lincoln sign the Emancipation Proclamation, Frederick Douglass, and he lives long enough to see the state of Mississippi pass the first Jim Crow law. He calls them the apostles of forgetfulness. And then, of course, you get not only Jim Crow, you get convict leasing, another form of slavery, which the use of the police force to conscript Black labor built cities like Birmingham, right?
And the lynching of the teens and 20s
the violence of the extra violence, the extra legal violence, even the courts. And then, of course, as you say, the mid 20th century, what did we get in response? We get calls for law and order. Right, Nixon 68, Nixon 72. We get the hard hat revolution or rebellion. Working class white folk, the silent majority asserting itself, the forgotten Americans. These languages sound familiar, right? And so here we are in this moment where the demographic shifts in the country, the browning of America. So they get really quickly, Tim. So Obama is elected in 2008, and we see workers, white, Black, green, purple, yellow, voting for him because they believe that the top 1%, they've broken the social contract, they're busting their behinds. And so the story goes, there's a pollster in somebody's house in the Midwest coming by to say who you're going to vote for, and the husband yells from the back room, "I'm voting for the N-word." Right. And so then everybody asks the question, right, once Trump wins in 2016, right, and flips those Obama counties, as it were, what happened? What happened? This can't be just about race. When in fact, we know over the 8 years that Obama was in office, the intensification of a sense of alienation, the intensification of white supremacist sensibility, driven by the peaking of the demographic shifts that happened over those 8 years, unleashed all of this energy that then led to the election of Donald Trump. And so here we are in this moment where that undertow, that America is changing, that it's not recognizable, that we're losing our footing and our hold at the same moment that we can barely make ends meet. I don't know if I can pass on dreams to my children, and then we got all of these brown and Black folk that big government is taking my hard-earned efforts and redistributing it to these folk. To hell with them all, right? And then you combine that with this idea among political leaders, especially, right? I mean, they quote Anne Rand, and she wrote a book entitled "The Virtue of Selfishness." And so if you have everybody out, you for 40 years, we've had a form of governance, Tim, that insists that you and I aren't citizens, but we're just simply self-interested persons in pursuit of our own aims and ends in competition and rivalry with each other.
There's no sense of mutuality.
And if you succeed, that's on you. If I fail, it's on me. So you get that kind of selfishness combined, right, with deep-seated racism and greed. Oh, we are on a nice edge. These are perilous times. They're the aftertimes, and they're perilous. And it's like nothing we've seen before.
You haven't wanted to use the phrase backlash. This is a backlash.
Yeah, no.
You don't buy the backlash argument, or the language anyway.
Yeah.
What would you say? It's just a reassertion of what's been there all along, or
it's a betrayal.
a retreat to the lie because it's the safe place to go?
I call it a betrayal
Of
democracy itself.
Mm-hmm.
When Donald Trump was elected in 2016, and I was beginning to toy around with the idea of this book, I just kept saying, damn, they did it again. They've done it again. And now I got to figure out how I'm going to raise my baby in this.
Mm-hmm.
And now my son, who's 24 now, can you imagine? He's 24 now. And he's coming in to tell me that he has to go to the protest. I said, but there's a pandemic killing us. I know, but I gotta go. Dad, it was 8 minutes and 46 seconds, Dad. I can't just sit here. So he has to risk his life in the midst of this, right? And you just go, this isn't about a backlash.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a euphemistic way of saying that white people want to be white. They want to be racist. They want to be committed to the world as it is. Why call it that? The backlash means that somehow I've overreached.
Mm-hmm.
No, forget that. No, you've betrayed the ideals again. You've turned your back on them again, right? That's what I want, that's what I want to say.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
If you're just now tuning in, you're listening to the Westminster Town Hall Forum, the final forum of this fall season. We're grateful to partner with Minnesota Public Radio, as we have done for many, many years. The Town Hall Forum will resume in this online version in early 2021. Look for details to come in January. And now we return to our conversation with Eddie Glaude Jr. I wonder if you might talk a little bit about the parallel between the Black Power movement and what happened in a way, the conclusion of the Civil Rights Movement and MLK and Black Power interaction and Black Lives Matter. Is there any parallel here in terms of what's happening, particularly to the white reassertion or kind of grasping for the safety of the lie, seeing a different type of black voice emerge?
I think there's some parallels, right? So Black Power, it's really important for us to think about Black Power as not wholly separate from the Civil Rights Movement. Many of the people who became proponents of Black Power were, in fact, veterans of the Civil Rights Movement. Stokely Carmichael Kwame Ture was one of the best organizers in the South, and he only broke nonviolent discipline, he said, once, and that's when the police attacked Dr. King. And Stokely Carmichael in Greenwood, 1960, declares, I've been to jail X number of times. I'm not going to jail anymore. We're going to stop saying freedom now. We're going to say Black Power. And that had everything to do with those young folk experiencing the raw terror of the South and the country taking its time because they devalued Black lives in some ways. But Black Power as a political moment has to be understood not as one movement. Black Power is a sensibility under which a wide range of political formations fell. So you could have been a conservative member of the Nation of Islam and thought to be a part of Black Power. You could be a cultural nationalist with us and Ron Karenga or Maulana Karenga and thinking about Kwanzaa. That's over there. Or you could be a part of the Dodge Revolutionary Union movement or the League of Revolutionary Black Workers or the progressive form of the Black Panther Party, right? So Black Power is a shorthand for a sensibility that covers a wide range of political moments. Black Lives Matter is the same. We want to read it as a movement like King, as if it's SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. But, you got reformist movements within Black Lives Matter. You think about DeRay McKesson and Brittany, Packnett Cunningham and the other folks, right? And they're putting forward reasonable claims around criminal justice reform and the like, but they're doing so within the broader frame of a certain kind of liberal politics. Then you get Movement for Black Lives. Some of those folk are, reading Marx in the Jungles of Brazil or something, right? So, and they're calling for more fundamental change, but they're all under the rubric of Black Lives Matter. You have folk who are calling for defund the police, and what they mean is budget your values. You have other folk who are calling for abolition, and those two things aren't the same thing. Mm-hmm. So just as America did with Freedom Now, just as America did with Black Power, they're doing with Black Lives Matter, and they take the slogan as the source of controversy. And so defund the police becomes the problem, as opposed to the claim that, do you not find it odd that municipalities are spending the majority of their budgets on policing and not on education or social services? And then you get the example of Walter Wallace in Philadelphia. The family called the 911 for an ambulance. They got the police, and now they have to bury their son, their uncle, their brother, their cousin, their friend. Mm-hmm. But we get caught up on the phrase because we don't want to deal with the reality of what's on the ground.
Mm-hmm. Thinking about H.R. 40 and the long-standing effort to get serious about reparations. And in a way, some of these movements are pushing in that direction. Right. A reallocation of resources to quote Isaiah, to be repairs of the breach, a restore of the streets to live in. Where do we get and how do we get engaged in a serious conversation about reparations?
I take my lead from Brian Stevenson. You mentioned Montgomery and mm-hmm. what he's trying to do with the Legacy Museum and the memorial around lynching, or the National Peace and Justice Memorial. And he says that truth and reconciliation is sequential. Mm-hmm. That first you have to tell the truth, then you can reconcile. And then that becomes the precondition for repair. Mm-hmm. So we have to tell the truth. And telling the truth is to say, look, racial inequality in this country is not the result of a culture of pathology. It's not the result of Black people being lazy or prone to criminality. It's not the result of us not having mental capacities to succeed in school, right? That this is policy. All of this is the result of policy. At the very moment in which the vaunted American middle class came into existence, there was policy that locked Black people out. When we think about the dual housing market, which allowed certain folk to gain access to wealth by virtue of FHA loans, we couldn't gain access to it. When you think about redlining and various mortgage practice, loaning, banking practices that locked us out, at the very moment in which the vaunted American middle class is coming into existence, Black folk are relegated to a certain sector of the economy. That's the dual labor market. Policy. Mm-hmm. Policy produced these differential outcomes, right? And we've been making choices ever since to reproduce the advantages and the disadvantages. We have to tell the truth about that. We have to tell the truth about so much. But we have to tell the truth about that so we can understand that it's only policy that will remedy it, that will remedy the inequality. If policy created it, what we're going to do is just say a prayer and that's going to remedy it? No, we have to remedy. I mean, you can still pray, but we have to do something concretely. Mm-hmm. So to begin to think about what a more just America will look like at scale, I've been saying this in my own head, that we need a broad public infrastructure of care, right? And that infrastructure of care involves three stools, or three legs to the stool, right? One has to do with healthcare. The other has to do with education, and the other has to do with safety. That every community needs to be safe and secure. All of us need the skills to not only dream dreams, but to make those dreams a reality. And all of us should be, people shouldn't be getting rich off of us being sick. Mm-hmm. Right? And that should be part of our social contract.
Each one of those legs on the stool is is a political question. What are the policies that we can adopt that will implement healthcare, education, and ways for communities to be safe?
And the first thing they say, though, Doc, and I'll say this really quickly,
Yeah.
we don't have the money.
Yeah.
And then you say, budget your values.
Yeah.
But anyway.
The Minnesota Council of Churches here locally just about 2-3 weeks ago adopted a sort of a manifesto, a commitment to truth-telling, education, and reparations. And they had a big debate on whether they're going to go with reparations or reconciliation, to parallel the South African model. And they said, no, we won't even get to reconciliation, true reconciliation in our community until we've dealt with reparations. And they've launched into this process where they want to lead our state, the faith community, lead our state in a conversation that begins with telling the truth. What advice would you have for a statewide organization that is seriously wanting to lead the public in a conversation about truth-telling that would get us toward reparations eventually?
What advice? Brace yourselves. Because truth-telling is not easy. Mm-hmm. Don't get caught up in performing one's guilt. Right? These aren't public rituals of expiation by way you engage in, self-flagellation around one's own sins. That's not the point. And nor is it the point to beg, to position oneself to beg for forgiveness. The point is really to say, this is what has made our life, our way of life possible. That's why I love this image by William James, right? The bitterness that is permanently at the bottom of the cup, right? Or the shards beneath our feet. Mm-hmm. That our way of life is predicated upon, ugliness in some ways. And this is what makes the 1619 Project so interesting to me. Mm-hmm. Right? It's not about it being a story of origins, because we can quibble around the facts of the matter. But it's a story of beginnings. And, Edward Said, the late social critic, said that the problem of beginnings is the beginning of the problem, where you start. Mm-hmm. So if we start with 1619, what comes into view? Well, the nation was a corporation before it was a nation. That comes into view. There's indentured servitude. So there's class. There's slavery, native peoples, and failure. What does it mean to start there in how we understand ourselves? Right? We got a much more humble orientation. Mm-hmm. To the future in some ways, to our understanding of ourselves. So where we begin is important. So the advice I would give is in a shorthand, is don't seek safety in comfort. Mm-hmm. Understand that it's going to be uncomfortable as we make our way to a different way of being together. So
which is the real project here. And democracy it affords us the possibility of doing that if it's practiced free and fairly. Mm-hmm. The demographic changes that are happening in the country, no matter whether we want them or not. In the mid 2040s, which is just 25 years from now, will be a majority black, brown nation. And if we aren't telling the truth, by that point, the demographics themselves will produce some serious trouble for us. I mean, we're in trouble now, but in terms of those who want to hang on to this lie about white America, guess what's coming?
Yeah, buckle up. Yeah. And the thing is that it's so the way in which it's playing itself out, those demographic shifts are already playing themselves out in our politics, mm-hmm. but they're also playing themselves out in where you live. So, most people who live in rural America aren't experiencing diverse America. So we're talking about the divide of, not only black and white, but rural, urban, Republican, Democrat, and how those things are overlaid with each other. So we live in such separate spheres, and they reduce it to the coast, these cosmopolitan elites who are telling us what to do and who look down upon us, and that's a bunch of BS. What we do know is that everyday ordinary Americans find themselves struggling, right, to keep their noses above water. They're busting their behinds to give a decent future to their children. And what we have to figure out in the midst of all of this is, how do we leave behind all of this ugliness so that we can imagine ourselves together differently again?
Yeah, Baldwin was a great practitioner of imagination, and he talked a lot about the power of love, which imagination can unleash. But he wasn't sentimental about love the way we often in our culture ease ourselves into these images of sentimental sort of movie-like love. Well, we have a question that Rachel from St. Paul sent in anticipation of this conversation, and about the power of love and not sentimental love. She says, during this election, we saw white people call for unity and love, among Christians particularly. Unity and love, no matter which way they voted. What would Baldwin say to that the use of love as a kind of in my view, glossing over a lot of reality, but it's happening. Christian love, is some feel is like that.
I rarely try to anticipate what Jimmy would say, because there's 7,000 words, 7,000 pages of his work that would likely offer us an answer. But my instinct is to say, don't press your loveless love onto me. Right? That's what that is, right? That's just, it's not only sentimentality, right? It's sentimentality is the mask for cruelty. You invoke love at the very moment in which I'm grieving, because you've been complicit in a world that put my baby in the coffin. You want to invoke love to me right now, right? In the very moment in which you hear my wailing, right? Because you have been silent around a society that treats my babies as if they're less valued. Now you want to love me. Mm-hmm. Now you want to invoke love. Mm-hmm. So, you got to come, if Baldwin's notion of love is much more exacting, it's much more daring, right? It forces a different kind of orientation to the world. Mm-hmm. It's not just agape. It's also philia. Mm-hmm. It's also eros. Mm-hmm. And all at the heart of those three Greek conceptions of love is deep vulnerability, right? And so don't invoke a loveless love so that I could absolve you of your sins. Mm-hmm. Right?
And there's also clearly a public dimension to love, which sentimentality ignores. And of course, Cornel West said justice is what love looks like in public.
In public, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. You had a Time magazine article this summer, and Melissa in Minneapolis refers to that article and quotes you, where you said, "We, those of us who will dare to actually learn from our history, must figure out how to be together differently in a new America." What do you mean by that? What does it mean to be together differently, and where does that project? Who's responsible for that project?
Well, we are.
We being all of us together.
All of us. When I use that we in this instance, is aspirational. Mm-hmm. It's those of us who happen to be white, those of us who've experienced the brunt of our country's sins, that together we have to figure out how to live apart from the assumptions that these categories carry for us. So, these categories, right, do the thinking for us over and over again. So we have to figure out how we're going to educate our kids differently. We got to figure out how we're going to live in our neighborhoods differently. We got to figure out how we're going to open up opportunities for all Americans, no matter their color, their zip code, their ability, who they love, right? We're going to have to, in some ways, forge a different kind of social contract, with each other. And I think that's going to take hard work, but we have to first break through the stereotypes and the assumptions and see the human beings right in front of us in all of their complexity, with their histories in tow. And so that's going to take hard work. I believe it's easy to snatch down a Confederate statue. It's not so easy to destroy the highway system surrounding Chicago. The built environment of this country reflects the ideology that we're railing against. We have to figure out a different way of being together. So that's at the level of the built environment. That's at the level of how we interact in church, how we interact in mosques and synagogues, how we interact in civic and social spaces, how we interact in our politics generally. Yeah.
Now, you and Baldwin both, in your writing and in his writing, speak of beginning again, especially when find ourselves in an after time. And how realistic is it in America today to think we could actually begin again?
It's not very realistic at all.
That's kind of what I thought you would say.
Yeah, if we're serious about it, our history suggests we're not going to do very well, Doc. To be honest with you, but this is why I quote Beckett: fail again, fail better.
So even if you're pessimistic about the beginning again succeeding, you find the energy to go for it, to try.
Yeah, it's not pessimism, it's unhopefulness. Pessimism is just the flip side of the optimist coin. Right. So I'm not a Panglossian optimism like Voltaire's Candide. This is the best of all possible worlds. Nor am I a pessimist like Schopenhauer, right? Drinking sherry and saying the world is gone to da-da-da-da, right? So I'm neither of those, right? I'm a meliorist, and whatever that word means is this, and that is that the world could either go to hell or it could be saved. It just depends upon us, right? It depends upon what we do. And so coming out of the tradition out of which I come, it's a blues-soaked hope, right? It's a blues-soaked hope. And that is, you can't, that's B.B. King. Nobody loves me but my mother, and she could be jiving too. So,
W.B. Du Bois, you quoted him on hope. A hope that is not hopeless.
Not hopeless, but
unhopeful.
Exactly.
I love that nuance. Another question,
Sure.
and you referred earlier in our conversation to an explosion, and particularly as the young people see this, and I assume you may have been referring to what happened on Memorial Day here in Minneapolis. So here's a question from Melissa again in Minneapolis. You said after watching George Floyd's funeral service that we were on the, quote, precipice of something potentially transformational. We stand at the crossroads. Now, 5 months later, and with November 3rd behind us, and this campaign behind us, it doesn't seem like we've been particularly transformed. Am I getting this wrong? Is there anything to give us hope?
Yeah. So no, you're not getting it wrong, Melissa. Standing at the crossroads isn't resolved by an election. No presidential election can do that. It's what we decide to do after, the election that matters. So we're at a crossroads. Baldwin has this wonderful formulation that human beings are both disasters and miracles. That we have to protect ourselves from the disasters that we've become, but understand that if we show up, at least there's a chance for a miracle. So we're still at the crossroads. The election wasn't going to resolve it, even if it came off really nicely. We're still right squarely, right in the middle of it all. I'm from the Gulf Coast, so I'm used to hurricanes. And there's the difficulty of the front end, the illusion of the calm of the eye, and then there's the tail. We still have the tail, y'all. Y'all still have to deal with the trial of Officer Shaven. We still have the tail coming. So brace yourselves. But we're miracles.
Final question. Time is running out here. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you. And I have a million other questions. But we're about to settle on who the next president's going to be. Imagine if that president or someone, maybe the vice president, were to contact you and say, let's sit down for an hour. I want to talk about what you think our priorities ought to be. Mm. You may not have much time here to say this, but where would you begin?
Well, first of all, I'd be like, you calling me? No, just kidding. No, but imagination. That's where I would begin. Right? We have to break outside of the frame of what we've been doing. We have to change the frame, and that's going to require an imaginative leap. You can't tinker around these edges. This frame is rotten at the core. Mm-hmm. So dare to be imaginative. Right? Be transformative.
We will leave it at that. Thank you very much, Professor Eddie Glaude Jr. Good to have you on Westminster Town Hall Forum, and blessings on you in your important work.
Thank you so much, and stay safe.
Mm-hmm. You too.